In the year 1607, upon the wild and windswept shores of Lough Swilly in the county of Donegal, where the cold grey waters crashed against the time-worn stones of Rathmullen, a storm of another kind gathered, not of sky and sea, but of treachery, fear, and the slow death of an ancient world. The Gaelic clans, who had ruled these northern lands since the days of Niall of the Nine Hostages, felt the English noose tightening like a serpent round their throats. Hugh Mac Art O'Neill, styled Earl of Tyrone by the crown he had once defied, walked the halls of his stronghold at Dungannon with the step of a man who knows the axe hovers above his neck. Beside him, in uneasy alliance, stood Rory O'Donnell, Earl of Tyrconnell, brother to the fiery Red Hugh, whose name still echoed in bardic songs as a flame against the invaders. These two lords had bent the knee in 1603 at Mellifont, after 9 long years of war that had scorched the fields of Ulster and left rivers red with the blood of Irish and English alike. The treaty promised mercy, titles restored, estates largely intact, the right to hold their lands under English law while clinging to the old ways in secret. Yet mercy proved a thin cloak. Sir Arthur Chichester, the Lord Deputy, a man hardened by the battles of Kinsale and the scorched earth campaigns that followed, watched their every move with the cold eye of a hawk. He and his officers, Sir John Davies, the Attorney General, and others hungry for land and power, pressed claims upon disputed borders, levied fines that drained coffers, and whispered of treason in the ear of King James. The Earls' incomes dwindled, debts mounted like winter snow. Rumors flew thicker than midges. Anonymous letters, forged plots, informers paid in gold to swear the lords consorted anew with Spain. Hugh, now in his late 50s, his beard streaked with gray from years of war and exile shadow, spoke low to Rory in a chamber lit only by rushlights and the dying embers of a turf fire. "They mean to strip us bare, brother," he said, voice rough as gravel. "Chichester sends riders to question our tenants, to measure our acres as if they already own them. If we tarry, they will arrest us for treason, real or invented, and our heads will grace Dublin Castle's spikes. Better to seek aid abroad than die like trapped wolves." Rory, younger, his eyes still burning with the fire of his brother's legacy, nodded grimly. Spain may yet open her arms. Philip III remembers Kinsale. He may send ships and men if we reach his court. But the journey, it is fraught. The seas are English patrolled, and storms care not for earls or kings. The plan took shape in secrecy. Cuchanacht Maguire, Lord of Fermanagh, a man whose loyalty had never wavered through the long war, arranged the means. A French merchant vessel of some 80 tons, crewed by hardened sailors from Nantes and Dunkirk. She would pose as a trader laden with salt and fishing nets, her true cargo the hopes of Ulster's nobility. Word passed in whispers among the trusted few, family, retainers, priests, and kin who refused to be left behind in chains. Hugh's wife, the Countess Catherine, daughter of the Magennis clan, gathered her jewels and relics, including a gold cross said to hold a splinter of the true cross. Their sons, young Hugh, Baron of Dungannon, John Bryan, clung to their father, sensing the peril though too tender in years to grasp its depth. Rory's bride Bridget, heavy with child, remained at Maynooth far south, ignorant of the flight that would separate them forever. Rathmullen itself, a small fishing haven nestled betwixt green hills and the broad Lough, became the heart of the conspiracy. The village folk, tenants, fishermen, women who spun wool by peat fires, knew something stirred, though few dared speak it aloud. Scouts rode the roads from Derry to Strabane, watching for English patrols. Spies in Dublin sent hurried messages. Warrants drawn, arrests imminent. The Earls moved with the caution of hunted deer, their councils held in shadowed halls where once harpers had sung of victories at the Yellow Ford. Now silent, save for the crackle of flame and the low murmur of Gaelic speech. "We flee not from battle," Rory told his brother Cathbar O'Donnell one night as they paced the strand under a moon veiled by clouds, "but from the gallows, in Catholic lands, Spain, perchance the Low Countries, we may rally aid." As September dawned chill and bright, the final pieces fell into place. The company swelled to nigh upon 100 souls. Nobles of ancient Ulster blood, Secretaries such as Tadg o Chianayan, a scholar of Fermanagh, who would chronicle every step in his native tongue. Servants, soldiers weary from the old wars. Mariners fluent in French, Spanish, Flemish. They carried little: gold, relics, letters sealed with wax. But their hopes weighed heavier than any anchor. On the eve of departure, Hugh stood alone upon the rocky shore, the loft stretching vast and dark before him. The wind whipped his cloak. Salt spray stung his eyes. "This land has been O'Neill since the dawn of time," he murmured to the waves. "Yet now we must leave, lest it bind us in English irons. God grant we return, or that our children do." Rory joined him, sword at his side. "We go as men who would live to fight again. The old ways die not with us. They live in the blood." At midday on the 4th of September, by the old reckoning, the embarkation began. Small carracks rowed the party out to the waiting ship, anchored in the deep channel of Lough Swilly. On the strand gathered a silent crowd: tenants, kin, village folk who had served these lords since boyhood. Mothers wept quietly. Children stared wide-eyed. No shouts, no farewells spoken aloud, lest English ears hear. The sails unfurled with a snap like breaking bone. The vessel slipped from the harbor, bound first for A Coruña in Spain, seeking refuge among old allies of the faith. As the ship grew small against the horizon, a heavy silence fell over Rathmullen. In distant Dublin, the news would soon reach Chichester's ears. Proclamations of treason would thunder forth. Vast tracts of Ulster, Armagh, Cavan, Coleraine, Donegal, Fermanagh, Tyrone, would be declared forfeit. Planters from England and Scotland would come, building fortified houses, enclosing fields, imposing new laws. The Gaelic world, with its tanistry, its brain customs, its clans bound by blood and honor, would fracture like ice in spring thaw. Yet in the hearts of those left behind, a spark remained. Whispers in the hills spoke of return, of aid from abroad, of the day the Earls would sail back with ships and swords. The flight was no mere escape. It was the seed of legends yet unborn. In the quiet hours that followed, as I set down this forgotten chronicle from fragments of diaries, bardic laments, and yellowed letters unearthed in distant archives, I urge thee, gentle reader, or perchance seeker of these revived tales of shadowed resistance, to spread word of such lost histories. Subscribe to our chronicle of forgotten European frontiers. Like this missive if it stirs thy blood. Comment thy thoughts below, and share with kin and comrades that these stories of clan and exile may not fade into oblivion once more. The ship had scarce cleared the mouth of Lough Swilly when the first whispers reached the English outposts at Derry and Carrickfergus. 'Twas but days after the 4th of September in the year 1607 that riders galloped south with urgent missives, bearing word of the Earl's departure. In Dublin Castle, Sir Arthur Chichester, Lord Deputy of Ireland, received the tidings with a grim smile that belied the storm within. "The traitors have fled," he wrote to King James, "and in their flight they have left the fairest opportunity ever offered to plant and reform that rude and irreligious corner of the north." The power vacuum yawned wide. Ulster, once the stronghold of Gaelic might, lay open like a wound ready for cauterizing. Word spread through the hills and glens like wildfire in dry heather. In the villages round Dungannon and Lifford, tenants of the O'Neill and O'Donnell gathered in hushed knots by turf fires, their faces drawn with bewilderment and grief. "The princes are gone," they murmured in the old tongue. "Imiach na Nirlai, the departure of the Earls. Have they forsaken us, or do they sail to bring back aid from the Catholic kings?" Mothers clutched their children closer, fearing the English soldiery would come swift to seize what remained. The bards, those keepers of memory, fell silent at first, then began to weave laments that would echo for generations. Songs of betrayal, of hope deferred, of a land left leaderless.
Chichester wasted no time. By the 17th of September, scarce 13 days after the flight, he pinned his counsel to the crown: divide the escheat lands among loyal natives, disbanded soldiers, and colonies of civil folk from England and Scotland. At His Majesty's pleasure, he added, the words a thin veil over his ambition. He and Sir John Davies, the Attorney General, a man sharp as a lawyer's quill and twice as pointed, set forth on tours of the northern counties. They rode through Tyrone, Armagh, Donegal, Fermanagh, Cavan, and Coleraine, holding commissions to survey the forfeited estates, measuring acres that had once been held by Tanistry and Brehon right, now deemed crown property by reason of treason. In the halls of Dublin, a proclamation was prepared. On the 15th of November, by the old style, King James issued it forth. The Earls were declared traitors, their flight an act of rebellion plotted against the realm. They have conspired with foreign princes, the document thundered, and abandoned their duties to flee like cowards. The lands of Hugh O'Neill and Rory O'Donnell, vast tracts stretching across 6 counties, were forfeit, escheat to the crown. Any who harbored their kin or clung to the old ways would face the same judgment. The lesser lords, sub-chiefs like Donnell Bala O'Cahan and Neil Garb O'Donnell, felt the chill wind. Their disputes with the Earls, once petty quarrels over rents and vassalage, now became tools in English hands to justify further seizures. Yet not all submitted meekly. In the wilds of Inishowen, Ker O'Doherty, a young lord who had served the English in hopes of reward, watched as his hopes crumbled. The O'Doherty lands, long disputed, were now eyed by planters. In the spring of 1608, when English forces pressed him too far, demanding arms, tribute, and submission, he rose in rebellion. With a band of followers, he struck at the fort at Culmore, slaying the governor and his men in a night of blood and fire. The uprising spread briefly, Derry trembled. But Chichester's response was swift and merciless. Troops marched north. O'Doherty was hunted down and slain at the Rock of Doon, his head sent to Dublin as trophy. His lands too were confiscated, swelling the pool for plantation. Amidst this turmoil, the common folk of Ulster bore the heaviest burden. Tenants who had paid cattle and service to their Gaelic lords now faced English sheriffs demanding rents in coin they scarce possessed. Some fled to the bogs and mountains, becoming Torai, outlaws, who raided the new settlers' herds by night. Whispers told of hidden camps in the Sperrins, where men sharpened pikes and spoke of the day the Earls would return with Spanish galleons. A young herdsman named Cormac Mac Gialafadraig, once a retainer to Rory O'Donnell, vanished into the hills after the proclamation, taking with him a relic, a silver chalice from the old abbey, and vowing never to bend knee to the foreign planters. His name became legend in the glens, the first of the Torai, a shadow that struck and faded, a reminder that the Gaelic spirit endured. In Rome, meanwhile, the exiles landed after a perilous voyage. Storms had buffeted their French ship. They touched Normandy, then the Spanish Netherlands, before reaching Italy. Pope Paul V received them with honor, granting pensions and a house, but no army. Philip III of Spain, weary of wars and debts, offered sympathy, but no ships. Hugh O'Neill, his dreams of return fading, wrote letters pleading for aid that went unanswered. Rory O'Donnell, broken in health, died in 1608, buried in San Pietro di Montorio. The Earl's hopes dimmed like candles in wind. Back in Ulster, the surveys continued. Chichester's men marked boundaries, drew maps, and listed tenants. English and Scottish undertakers, men of means who promised to build stone houses, plant Protestant churches, and exclude Irish from good lands, received grants. The first arrivals trickled in, hardy Scots from the lowlands, English yeomen seeking fortune. They brought plows, seeds, and Bibles, building fortified bounds against the rude natives. Yet the Irish remained, working as laborers on the new estates, their resentment simmering beneath the surface. One night in late 1608, as snow blanketed the hills of Tyrone, a small band gathered in a ruined chapel near Dinganon. Cormac Mac Gialafadraig, now gaunt and wild-eyed, spoke to them in low Gaelic. "The Earls are gone, but we are not. The Torai shall harry these strangers till they flee or learn to fear." They swore oaths on the old cross, hidden in the chapel wall, and slipped into the darkness. Small raids followed, cattle lifted, barns fired, enough to unsettle the planters, but not to overthrow them. The English called them woodkern, bandits. The Irish called them defenders. Wingfield's counterstroke came relentless. He retook the ruins of Derry, besieged Burt, and captured Cair's family as hostages. Morale wavered. The rebels, seeing their chief's kin in English hands, pressed him toward open battle. "We must strike or scatter," they urged. Cair chose the former. On the 5th of July, near Kilmacrennan by Letterkenny, he arrayed his 1,000 upon ground of his choosing, rough terrain where English horse could not charge freely. The clash was brief but bloody. Musket smoke choked the air, pikes clashed, and in the thick of it, a ball struck Cair full in the head. He fell from his horse, dead before he touched the earth. The rebellion crumbled like dry turf. The remnants fled to the hills, becoming Torai, pursued outlaws, who would harry the planters for years to come. Chichester, triumphant, claimed much of Inishowen for his own reward. Cair's severed head was borne to Dublin and spiked upon Newgate, his quartered body displayed in Derry as warning. The summer assizes of 1608 judged the 6 counties: Tyrone, Armagh, Coleraine, now Londonderry, Donegal, Fermanagh, Cavan, firmly in the king's hand. The lesser rebels were hunted down. Donnell Bala O'Cahan languished in prison, his lands forfeit. Neil Garb O'Donnell, suspected of complicity, met the same fate. The power vacuum widened, inviting the full measure of plantation. Yet in the aftermath, the spark did not die. In hidden cabins and mountain fastnesses, the Torai gathered. Men like the young Cormac Mac Giala Fadraig from Part 2, now joined by survivors of Kilmacrennan. They raided by night, lifted cattle from settler herds, vanished into bogs when pursued. Songs arose in the old tongue, laments for Cair, the last Gaelic chief to stand in open war, prophecies that the Earls would return or that their blood would rise again in future generations. The land itself seemed to mourn. Storms lashed the coasts, as if the very elements wept for lost honor. The English pressed on with surveys, mapping the escheat in the glens and bogs. Resistance simmered low but unquenched. The woodkern, those dispossessed soldiers and broken clansmen, haunted the forests, striking at night against isolated settler farms. Cattle vanished from byres. Barns went up in flame. Lone riders were ambushed on lonely roads. The English called them bandits. The Irish named them Torai, the pursued who yet pursued. Cormac Mac Giala Fadraig, the young herdsman from Tyrone who had vanished into the hills after the flight, now led a small band of these shadows. Once a retainer to Rory O'Donnell, he had taken the oath in the ruined chapel near Dinganon, swearing on the hidden silver chalice to harry the planters till they fled or learned fear. His raids were swift and merciless. A herd lifted from a Scottish undertaker's land near Strabane, a supply wagon overturned on the road to Derry, a message left carved in the bark of an oak. The Torai remember. Chichester, mindful of the peril, deported 1,300 former Gaelic swordsmen to serve in the Swedish armies in 1609, thinning the ranks of potential rebels. Garrisons sprang up, stone forts at Enniskillen, Charlemont, Mountjoy, where English and Scottish soldiers drilled and watched the horizons. Yet the kern persisted, slipping through the bogs like smoke, their knowledge of the land a weapon the newcomers lacked. In the winter of 1610, a party of undertakers near Armagh lost half their stock to a night raid. The settlers, terrified, petitioned for more troops. "These people are not subdued," one wrote to London, "but bide their time like wolves in the wood." The settlers themselves faced hardships undreamed in their homelands. The journey across the Irish Sea was perilous. Many arrived sickly from the voyage or the fever that lurked in the lowlands. They built timber houses at first, then stone where they could, enclosing fields with hedges in the English fashion. Towns rose: Luggan, Portadown, Dungiven, named for planters, or old Gaelic sites repurposed. The London companies, grumbling at the expense, fortified Derry with walls and gates, its streets echoing with the accents of Middlesex and the Thames. Yet famine struck in lean years. The Little Ice Age chilled the summers, blighting crops. Settlers rode home of savage wilderness and discontented natives who watched from the hills with eyes like embers. Amidst the planting, a quiet tragedy unfolded for the Gaelic culture. The Brehon law, once governing inheritance and disputes, gave way to English common law. The harpers fell silent in many halls. The old tongue retreated to the hearth and the hidden glen. Some natives converted to the established church for favor, but most clung to the Catholic faith, served by wandering priests who said Mass in secret. The conversion of the Irish to Protestantism failed miserably. Ministers spoke only English, while the people remained monoglot in Gaelic. The divide deepened, a chasm of language, faith, and memory. By the 1620s, the plantation had taken root, though unevenly. Some 20,000 British settlers dotted the province, clustered around towns and good land, while the Irish endured on the fringes. Tacit accommodations emerged. Irish tenants worked English estates, Scots intermarried in borderlands, but resentment festered. Toby Caulfield, an English officer, wrote in 1610 that there is not a more discontented people in Christendom than the Ulster Irish. Gaelic bards composed laments, verses bewailing the foreign tribes who took the land, the chiefs banished, the old order broken. Lachlan O'Delaya's poem echoed in the glens, a dirge for a lost world. Cormac Mac Giala Fadraig's band grew bolder in these years. In 1615, they struck a fortified bound near Clogher, seizing arms and powder before melting into the Sperrins. The planters called for his head. Rewards were posted in Derry and Armagh. Yet he evaded capture, a living ghost of the old resistance. His name became a whisper of hope among the dispossessed. The Torai live. The day will come. The new order stood, but brittle. The planters built their walls high, yet every raid reminded them that the land remembered its own. The plantation had transformed Ulster, towns founded, fields enclosed, a Protestant community planted, but the seeds of future strife were sown deep in the soil. In the quiet hours that followed these years of planting and shadow, as I record this forgotten chronicle from surveys, letters of undertakers, and the fading laments of the bards, the cost of conquest weighs heavy. The Gaelic flame dimmed, yet it burned on in the hearts of men like Cormac, waiting for the wind to fan it anew. The years that followed the full planting of Ulster stretched into decades of uneasy quiet, broken only by the raids of the remaining Torai and the slow grinding of new laws upon old wounds. By the 1630s, the province bore a face transformed. Towns like Londonderry rose with high walls and orderly streets, their bells ringing Protestant hymns. Fields lay enclosed in neat hedges, tilled by Scottish ploughmen and English yeomen. Stone-bound stood sentinel over the valleys, their cannon turned outward against the shadowed hills where the dispossessed still lurked. Yet beneath this ordered surface, the land remembered. The native Irish, pushed to the bogs and uplands, labored as tenants on the estates they once called their own, paying rents in coin or sweat, their Gaelic tongue retreating to the hearth while English law held sway in the courts. The fire kindled by the flight and the brief blaze of Care O'Doherty's rebellion did not die. It smoldered, waiting for wind. In the autumn of 1641, as harvests failed and rumors flew of fresh confiscations, the spark ignited once more. Sir Philem O'Neill, a kinsman of the exiled Hugh and beneficiary of some plantation grants, led the rising in Ulster. On the 22nd of October, his followers seized Charlemont Fort and spread across the province, rallying the dispossessed. The rebellion, meant as a swift strike for redress, unleashed a storm of long-buried rage. Settler families, English and Scottish alike, were attacked in their homes. Farms burned. Thousands perished in the winter cold or at the hands of vengeful bands. The planters, caught unawares, fled to fortified towns or the coast, their cries of massacre echoing back to England and Scotland. The numbers slain remain disputed. Some accounts spoke of 12,000, others less, but the horror scarred the Protestant mind. In Armagh and Tyrone, where the plantation had taken deepest root, the violence was fiercest. Cormac Mac Giala Fadraig, now an old man hardened by years in the hills, joined the fray one last time, leading a band that struck settler outposts near Dinganon. He fell in the fighting, his body left unmarked in a bog, yet his name lived on in whispered tales as the last true Torai of the old order. The rebellion swelled beyond Ulster, drawing in Catholic gentry from Leinster and Connaught, forming the Confederate wars that ravaged the island for a decade. Cromwell's conquest in 1649 to 1653 crushed the rising. Irish lands were confiscated anew under the Act of Settlement. soldiers and adventurers took the soil, driving many natives west beyond the Shannon. The old Gaelic nobility, or what remained, scattered further, some to the continent as wild geese, serving in French and Spanish armies. Others endured as hidden priests or poor tenants. The plantation, though battered, endured. The Protestant community in Ulster grew stronger, its siege mentality deepened by memories of 1641. Hugh O'Neill and Rory O'Donnell, in distant Rome, heard faint echoes of these storms before death claimed them. Rory perished in 1608, scarce a year after landing, broken in body and spirit. Hugh followed in 1616, aged and weary, his dreams of return unfulfilled. They lie buried in San Pietro in Montorio, their tombs a quiet monument to lost sovereignty. Their sons and kin fared little better. Many died young in exile. Brian, Hugh's boy, found hanged in Brussels. Others served in foreign regiments, their blood spilled on battlefields far from Ulster. The main lines faded in the 17th century, yet the names endured. The descendants of the clans scattered like seed on the wind. Branches of the Onnells and O'Donnells took root in Spain, France, and the Low Countries, where they commanded Irish brigades, fought in wars against England, and intermarried with continental nobility. Some returned in later centuries as soldiers or scholars. Others carried the legacy into the Irish diaspora, America, Australia, the world beyond. Today, those bearing the surnames trace their blood to Neil of the Nine Hostages through these ancient lines, their stories woven into the fabric of Irish identity worldwide. The flight of the Earls and the plantation that followed reshaped Ireland forever. Ulster became a land divided. Protestant majority in the northeast, tied to Britain by blood and memory. Catholic communities enduring on the margins, their resentment a quiet undercurrent. The sectarian divide, born in those years of dispossession and resistance, echoed through the centuries. In the Williamite Wars, the penal laws, the famine, the home rule struggles, and into the troubles of the 20th century. The land still bears the marks. Place names anglicized, towns founded by planters, walls that once guarded against the native Irish now symbols of separation. Yet the Gaelic spirit persisted. In the glens of Donegal and the sperrins of Tyrone, old songs are sung, tales told of the Earl's departure, of Cair's last stand, of the Torai who refused to yield. Modern commemorations, centers in Rathmullen, sculptures unveiled, exhibitions in Rome, keep the memory alive. The clans, though their chieftains sleep in foreign soil, live on in descendants who claim the heritage, in the Irish language revived, in the unbowed pride of a people who remember. And so the story closes, not with victory or defeat, but with endurance. The shadow of 1607 fell long across the land, but light breaks through in the retelling. The Earls sailed away, yet their legacy sails still, in bloodlines scattered, in songs unbroken, in the quiet resolve that the old ways, though changed, are never wholly lost. Here ends this forgotten chronicle, drawn from proclamations, bardic laments, letters of exiles, and the enduring voice of the land itself. The flight and the plantation were but one chapter in the long tale of resistance and survival. Their echoes remind us that history is not dead, but lives in those who carry it forward. Brief factual summary: the flight of the Earls, 1607, saw Hugh O'Neill, Earl of Tyrone, Rory O'Donnell, Earl of Tyrconnell, and about 90 followers flee Ireland to seek continental aid, fearing arrest for treason. Declared traitors, their vast Ulster estates were escheat, enabling the Plantation of Ulster, 1609 onward, which settled English and Scottish Protestants on the land. This displaced many native Irish, sowing deep sectarian divisions. Brief resistance, like Care O'Doherty's 1608 rebellion, was crushed. The event facilitated the 1641 Irish Rebellion, where dispossessed Catholics rose against settlers, leading to massacres and further confiscations under Cromwell. Descendants of the O'Neill and O'Donnell clans served in European armies, wild geese, with lines continuing in exile. Modern bearers of the names trace to these roots, and the legacy shapes Ulster's Protestant-Catholic divide, influencing events up to the partition of Ireland in 1921 and beyond.